boys and girls. This is Ms. Kathy of Kathy's Kids Storytime. I'm so glad you could join me for this special series of Bible stories on the life of Jesus. Our focus this week at Carolina Camp Meeting for Kids is Fix Your Eyes on Jesus. It is said that by beholding, we become changed. In all of these stories, the characters who beheld Jesus, who fixed their eyes on him, were changed. It was my original intention that these Bible stories be videotaped with real people. Then, as I was writing the scripts, COVID-19 hit our home and we went into quarantine. We have weathered the mild form that we experienced, with thanks to our kind Father in heaven, though we are still in quarantine at the time the production for these stories needs to be completed. With a short time left before putting these stories up for camp meeting, I decided to rewrite them in a different form and present them as Kathy's Kids Bible Story Time. I hope you will use your great imagination to help you visualize what the people might have looked like, the places where they were, the things that they did. To learn more about the Bible, I enjoy reading the Bible stories, looking for details, learning about the culture, beliefs, and historical information of the time, looking at maps in my Bible and pictures of places and people to help me imagine what they might have been like and the things that they experienced and might have done. In these stories, you will hear of familiar Bible characters. The storyline is based on the Bible accounts, but there are some character names that you will not have heard before. That's because the Bible doesn't give their names. I have given them names to help you visualize them as real people. There are other aspects of their lives that I have written into the story also to help you imagine what life might have been like. The main point of these stories is that all of these people fixed their eyes of faith, their hopes on Jesus. He heard their pleas of faith, their prayers to him, whether they were thought or spoken, and blessed them richly because of it. Jesus will hear you too. I invite you to fix your eyes on Jesus, to trust Jesus with your life. Say yes to Jesus and invite him into your heart. If you keep your eyes on him, he will lead you on an amazing life adventure that is just the beginning of spending eternity with him. Won't you start now? I hope you enjoy these stories. The Healing Touch of Jesus. Rachel hummed happily to herself as she worked at her table preparing food for the evening meal. She stopped to make a mental note of what she still needed to do to be ready when Jairus would arrive home. As the ruler of the synagogue in Capernaum, Jairus kept a very busy schedule, and he would be famished and ready to eat as soon as he came into the house. Let's see now. I've made loaves of bread and lentil stew, she thought. What fruit shall I have? Rachel inspected some ripe oranges in a wooden bowl, picked them up, and peeled away the skins, releasing the pungent fragrance of citrus. She sniffed the air, enjoying the aroma. Everything was ready. Rachel sat down to rest on a nearby bench. Then she poured a cool cup of water from the earthen jug on the table. As she rested, she allowed her thoughts to drift back over recent events that had taken place in Capernaum. A man named Jesus had come to Capernaum and caused quite a stir with the stories he told. While he was there, he had called some of the local fishermen as his followers. And then there were the miracles. Jesus had honored the request and simple faith of a Roman centurion in Capernaum by speaking words of healing for his servant who was at home, lying in bed, paralyzed and in terrible pain. The centurion felt too unworthy to have Jesus come to his home to heal his servant. So all he asked Jesus to do was speak the word, and Jesus did. The servant was immediately healed. Jesus had also healed the mother-in-law of Peter the fisherman. She had been sick with a high fever, and Jesus had simply touched her hand. Her fever had immediately left, and she had gotten right out of bed to prepare a meal for him. Word had spread quickly about what Jesus had done for Peter's mother-in-law. That evening, people brought their sick family members and friends to the home of Peter, asking for Jesus to heal them. By the end of the day, all those who were sick in Capernaum had been healed. Then there was the paralytic man whose friends were so anxious for Jesus to heal him, they were willing to go to extraordinary effort to get to Jesus when Peter's house, where he was teaching, was too crowded with people. They took the man around the house on his sleeping mat, up on the roof, and removed some tiles so they could make a way to let him down right in front of Jesus. When Jesus saw their faith, he showed the power of God not only by forgiving the man's sins, but also by telling him to stand up, pick up his bed, and walk, and he had walked out of the house with no problem. Amazing! Since that time, Jesus had traveled with his disciples through the nearby towns and villages, spreading the good news of the kingdom of God. He and his disciples had just returned from a trip across the Sea of Galilee to Gergesa, where Jesus had healed a demon-possessed man. Rachel paused in her thoughts to take a cool drink from her cup. Her face grew serious as she thought again of what had recently taken place. While Jesus and his disciples were away, Sarah, their 12-year-old daughter of Jairus and Rachel, had suddenly become very sick with a burning fever. She was so sick that she didn't know what was happening around her. Rachel had brought cloths soaked with cold water and placed them on her forehead and bathed her hot body. Jairus called the doctors, but they did not know what to do for her. Sarah's fever became worse. Sarah was their only child, and they had feared that she would die. Though he was a proud man and knew that the Pharisees did not like Jesus, Jairus told Rachel that he would go and ask Jesus to come and heal Sarah. He heard that Jesus was attending a dinner at Levi Matthew's house and quickly went looking for him there. Finding Jesus, he had fallen on his knees at Jesus' feet and fervently pleaded, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and lay your hands on her. Heal her so she can live." Jairus had told Rachel that Jesus immediately went with him, and a crowd of people that had been with Jesus at the meal followed along with them. While they were on the way to Jairus' home, a woman also followed in the crowd. She was anxious to see Jesus too. For 12 years she had been suffering from a disease that caused her to bleed constantly. Though she had gone to see many doctors and had spent everything she had trying to get their help, she had not gotten better. Instead, she had grown worse. Now she saw Jesus moving ahead with the crowd and her opportunity to receive his help slipping away. She thought, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. So she reached out and touched the hem of his robe from behind. Immediately, she felt that her body had been healed. The bleeding stopped. Jesus realized that healing power had gone out from him and turned to ask the crowd, "Who touched me?" His disciples pointed out that there was a crowd all around him and wondered why he would ask such a question. But the frightened woman came forward and fell at his feet and told him what she had done. He said, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is now over." Meanwhile, Rachel had anxiously waited for Jairus to come, hoping that he would hurry home with Jesus before Sarah would get worse and die. But Sarah's fever had continued and her breathing became labored. Finally, Rachel could do no more. Sarah breathed her last breath. Tears came to Rachel's eyes as she remembered her feelings of utter hopelessness. Rachel had sent messengers to Jairus to tell him the sad news. Jesus was still speaking with the woman who had been healed when the messengers came to Jairus, bringing him the news that his daughter had died and that there was no use troubling Jesus anymore. But Jesus told Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just have faith." Jesus had dismissed the crowd who had been following him, and he, along with his 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, had gone with Jairus to his home. When they arrived, they heard the sounds of loud weeping and wailing from friends and neighbors and others who had gathered to mourn for Sarah. Jesus quickly sent them all away, saying, "This child isn't dead, she's only asleep." But everybody laughed at him. Jesus had taken Jairus and Rachel along with his 3 disciples and gone to the room where Sarah was lying in her bed. He came to her side, took her hand gently in his, and speaking softly said, "My child, get up." Right then, they had watched as a tremor had passed through Sarah's still form and life had returned to her. Her closed mouth had broken into a smile. Her eyes had opened wide as if she was just waking up from sleep. She looked surprised as she tried to comprehend what was happening. Then, Sarah had stood up, and Jairus and Rachel had hugged her tightly in their arms, crying with joy over the miracle Jesus had just done for their daughter Sarah. Jesus had told them to give Sarah something to eat, and made it clear that they were not to tell anyone what had happened. As she visualized what Jesus had done for them, Rachel felt the joy well up within her all over again. It had been hard to keep this miracle to themselves. She and Jairus had wanted to shout their praises to God. In the end, it was their neighbors and friends who were spreading the word everywhere. They saw Sarah dead and knew that she was now alive. Some people, especially the Pharisees, thought it was all made up, that Sarah was just asleep, not really dead. But Jairus and Rachel knew it was not made up. They had seen their daughter, Sarah, lying still and unbreathing, and had seen Jesus raise her up from the dead. Only one sent from God could have worked a miracle like that. As Rachel wept tears of thankfulness and joy once again for what God had done for them and for their daughter, Sarah came running into the room and said, "Emma, I'm hungry. May I please have a piece of bread?" Seeing her mother in tears, Sarah stopped suddenly. "What's wrong, Emma?" Rachel dried her tears by wiping her hands across her face. "Nothing, my child. I am thinking once again of what God has done for you. Tell me again what you remember when Jesus came to make you well." "Well," said Sarah, "I was very sick and didn't know anything until I saw the kind face of Jesus bending over me. I remember that his hand was soft and warm." Sarah smiled. "Then he told me to get up and helped me up from the bed. I did not feel sick anymore. Instead, I felt so good and so happy." Rachel hugged Sarah and said, "And now we are so happy to call Jesus our friend. Sarah, he gave you life once again, and we are so thankful for what he did for us and for you."